I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you're a caterpillar. I mean, it might be a common or garden caterpillar, like that for the cabbage white butterfly. Alternatively, it might be the caterpillar for the monarch butterfly. The thing about caterpillars is that they are incredibly hungry. They're just consumed with appetite. Now, hopefully, your particular caterpillar is in a lovely garden or vegetable plot or whatever. But you're consuming, consuming, consuming. You're never satisfied. And then one day, and you don't understand why, something happens. You lose your appetite. And then you trek off to find a suitable branch or twig, and you spin a thread, and you hang yourself upside down. And you don't know why. And then something rather extraordinary starts to happen. Your organs start to break down. Not something you particularly welcome, but that's what happens. And they go to a goo, or slurry. And in that slurry, there are things called imaginal cells, the living blueprints, which, when they start off, are more or less like single-cell organisms. They don't particularly seem to know what they're doing, but over time, they start to coordinate. They start to almost dance to an invisible, inaudible musical score. And they put together the organs of the butterfly, which are nothing like those of the caterpillar. And they put them together through using the nutrients in that slurry. And then the day comes, inevitably, when the butterfly is forming within the chrysalis and finally develops the strength to break out. Well, in the monarch butterfly, that's after about 8 to 12 days. And then it comes out and it hangs again from the chrysalis, and it stretches its wings and it dries them out before it flies out into the landscape. Now, that is a metaphor. We're all used to it. But I'm going to use it in relation to our economies and in relation to business and the financial markets. So, about 20 years ago, well, firstly, I should just say that you're not caterpillars, and I'm not a caterpillar, but we're all part of what, as we've heard other speakers in a way address, a caterpillar economy. And that came clear very, very much so earlier on this year when a group called the Global Footprint Network published the latest round of their outreach. Sorry. There's a day in the year where Earth Overshoot Day, where we as a species overtake the capacity of this planet to regenerate its resources. And when they projected that back into the 1970s, when I imagine many of you were already alive, that Earth Overshoot Day would have been in December. This year, it's come down and down and down. This year, it was July the 29th. And as the former Unilever CEO, Paul Polman, put it a couple of days ago, that's the day that we start to steal from future generations. So about 20 years ago, in fact, exactly 20 years ago, I wrote a book called The Chrysalis Economy. It was over-optimistic. I thought that by the year 2030, we would see a world where our economies were in a profound process of change, of metamorphosis. I predicted that we would see industry after industry beginning to go through quite profound disruptive changes. Now, you'll hear shortly from Adam Dorr of Rethink X. Now, if you haven't come across their work on multiple different sectors, I really do recommend it very highly, because what it shows is that whether you're in transportation and mobility, whether you're in cattle ranching and dairying, whether you're in energy or the financial markets, over the next 20 or so years, there are massive disruptions coming through. We talk about butterflies in the stomach. In one sector after another, senior business people are starting to get that sense of unease. And whether they're in big coal or big oil or big meat or big water or whatever it happens to be, they're sensing that the landscape is about to go through, starting to go through seismic changes. And that's the environment in which we largely work. Now, butterflies, which is the next stage, obviously, after the chrysalis, are lightweight. They're very easily blown off course. And I say that as somebody who's set up 4 what we now call social businesses since 1978. They all still exist, but they've all been subject to the battering of market forces and ups and downs in client interest and so on. The thing about butterflies is, though, that they're enormously important in terms of the regeneration of ecosystems. So they are pollinators. They also turn up in many other animals' food chains. But there's something else that we learn when we're relatively young, which is this idea of the butterfly effect. You know, a butterfly somewhere in Costa Rica flaps its wings, and somewhere else, it might be in Asia, there's a typhoon or a storm. I think we're seeing that butterfly effect now starting to happen in boardrooms and in C-suites and in the senior teams of financial institutions and so on. And the number of times that CEOs and similar level of people have said to me in the last year to 18 months, I'm now getting the pressure from my children at the breakfast table. I'm now getting that pressure from interns, younger people sort of coming into our industry. I'm getting it, and our recruiters are getting it, when we're talking to young people that we desperately want to pull in, you know, tomorrow's talent. That level of questioning, that level of challenge is really starting to have a really important effect. So how extraordinary it is that a young girl in an anorak can sit down on the steps of her national parliament and in a very few short years trigger this extraordinary social movement. Like a number of people here, I've been out on some of the school climate strike marches and talked to the young people. And it's very clear they want to see change. And that won't blow away imminently. And I think business really has to understand that. But we have to understand something else too. And earlier on today, we heard the case made that we don't need that much money to make this happen. I absolutely fundamentally disagree. And I'll give you one example of why I disagree. In 1833, the United Kingdom passed the Slavery Abolition Act. That year alone, it cost the Treasury 40% of its revenues and 5% of GDP, whether you believe in GDP or not. This was a huge slug of money. Now, it happened to be going to buy out the property rights of slave owners, which was an extraordinary idea. But that got slavery stopped. And one proposition I played with in the recent years is whether we're going to have to buy out the pollution rights of some of the big coal and oil companies. I really hope it doesn't come to that, but this is so urgent now. We're going to have to think about how we break these patterns. Now, I'm sort of standing on the red carpet, and it's a wonderful color, red. I mean, it's for excitement, it's for danger, it's also for risk and uncertainty, and it's for debt. And I think we're imposing ecological or intergenerational debt on younger people to come. And so I sort of see this red symbolizing that too. So the question I'm going to raise today is, how do we turn this red carpet, at least symbolically, over time, black for intergenerational credit, where we start to push Earth Overshoot Day backwards towards December. That is going to take quite a long time. And one thing that's very striking about the monarch butterfly, and I didn't know this before I wrote the book, I thought that the same insect went right the way from Mexico, the forests there, right up through North America, into Canada in some cases, and then came back. Not so. As probably some of you will already know, it takes 4 to 5 generations of the butterfly to complete that cycle. How extraordinary is that? And that, I think, is in a sense a model of what we've now collectively got to do. And we really are not good at thinking intergenerationally. Even basic things like pensions, people struggle with. How do we do that? I think we have to really increase the intensity of the pressures on our economies and on our business. And we've got to sustain those pressures for a considerable time to come. That means changing the rules of the game. And that means changing not just our policies, it means changing our laws, it means changing economics and how that is practiced, how we determine what should be valued and what not. Now, I always want to, people keep asking people like me, what do I do? And so I'm just going to give you three things that I think we can collectively do. Relatively simple. First thing is just think about some of the caterpillar behaviors that you practice, your family practices, your organization practice. We've heard about meat consumption. We've heard about all sorts of things that people might do. What am I going to do? Well, consequences in London, which is where I live, dictate that from October, well, end of this month, we will not be able to drive our car. I've had a car for 45 years. So I could say, I'm going to buy an electric car, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, can we get by without a car at all? So that's the first thing, caterpillar behaviors. Let's think about those. Second, the chrysalis. What can each of us in our multiple different ways do to increase the intensity of pressure on business, on markets, on our economies? One thing I've done is, we support many NGOs, activist organizations, but Client Earth is one that a number of you will have heard about. They use the law around the world to fight the coal industry, fight the oil industry, and to stop new power plants being built. They're incredibly effective. They've stopped hundreds of plants being built, and they're now transferring that model to Asia. That for me is an example. There are many other organizations out there that you can potentially support, but just go through that process of thinking. What can you do that isn't simply helping a little bit of wildlife, but really puts pressure on our economies? And the final thing is, butterflies, as I've said, are lightweight. Many people in this room may well be, and online, may consider that they're social enterprises and so on. In the economy, they're a bit like the butterfly. They're again, slight, they're not incredibly heavy, and they're blown every which way. So we need platforms, we need networks that actually link these organizations together. And among the ones that we're involved in, certainly B Lab and the B Corporation movement, the TED and TEDx network is an extraordinary way of sort of listening to some of these stories. And then just launched in the United States by Paul Hawkins, some of you will know of, regeneration.org, an extraordinary platform sort of helping people in the regenerative economy and discover more about that. So to conclude, I asked us all to think about what it would be like to be a caterpillar. We are, whether we like it or not, very much like caterpillars. One thing I didn't say, though, about the monarch butterfly and other caterpillars is that once they start to break down in the chrysalis, the immune system of the caterpillar fights back really quite intently. But over time, the imaginal cells, as they get their act together, overwhelm that pushback. We're seeing that pushback. We're seeing it with people with vested capital, vested interests in the old economy. We expect a lot more of that. But just go back to that slavery example. Very small actions by people who were thought to be extremists at the time, over time, really shifted the system. And that's what we're about to see again, whether it's ecocide, whether it's dealing with the planetary emergency, including climate. Now, some of you may wonder why I'm holding this when it's illegal to have notes when you're doing a TEDx talk. It's a prop, I'll explain it that way. But it's a prop for my memory. My memory is 72 years old. I think it was Paul McCartney said, memory almost full. We all struggle as we get a little bit older to remember things, but I just want to leave you with a couple of points. Firstly, I feel I'm coming up the most ferocious learning curve at the moment, and I feel that the next 10 to 15 years are going to be the most exciting, the most challenging, and politically the most demanding of my entire working life, because now it's happening. Now we've got to take responsibility for what's happening and work with some of the key actors to make change happen in the right way. So the final point is just simply, when I face that somewhat challenging future, what a comfort it is to think that there are people like you in this room and again online that we can work with as we build that next generation of butterfly effects. Because make no mistake, the powerful are beginning to listen, whether it's in the private sector, public sector, or wherever. And we can really drive these things much faster over the next 10 years than we might expect. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.